Get out, my husband mocked, waving papers in the house I fully paid for. He smirked as if throwing me out would break me. I signed, placed the keys on the table, and walked away. The next morning, his elite lawyer screamed at him, "Do you have any idea what you just let her do? We need to talk about the house." Blake's voice cut through the darkness at 7 a.m., and I found him sitting in my home office chair, fully dressed, briefcase at his feet. He'd arranged my own financial documents across the desk. Bank statements, mortgage papers, the deed, like evidence in a courtroom. "I've done some calculations," he continued, pulling out a fresh legal pad covered in numbers. "It's time we discuss who really owns what in this marriage." The briefcase gleamed under the office lights, brown leather with silver combination locks that screamed desperation more than authority. Blake had positioned himself behind my custom mahogany desk, the one I'd commissioned after my first 7-figure contract, sitting there like a CEO at a board meeting he'd crashed without invitation. My filing cabinet hung open, the lock I'd installed specifically to protect sensitive client information now violated, its contents scattered across my workspace in what Blake clearly believed was a dramatic presentation. He'd sorted everything into neat piles, mortgage statements showing my name alone on every payment for 6 years. Property tax records dated 3 years before we'd even met at that industry conference where he'd impressed me with big talk about entrepreneurial vision. The morning sun streamed through windows I'd chosen myself, illuminating dust particles floating between us, and I noticed he'd shoved my industry leadership awards aside to make room for his amateur legal performance. "You broke into my locked cabinet," I said, keeping my voice level despite the violation burning in my chest. Blake didn't flinch, just tapped his cheap ballpoint pen against the legal pad where he'd scrawled marital assets in handwriting that looked like a middle schooler's first attempt at cursive. "It's our cabinet, Cassidy," he corrected with practiced patience, the kind of tone you'd use with a confused child. "Marriage means partnership, 50-50 split. That's what my attorney explained to me." His attorney, those words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of realization through everything I thought I knew about my husband. I stepped closer, studying the man I'd married 4 years ago, during what I'd foolishly believed was a romantic whirlwind, noticing the charcoal gray suit I'd purchased for him last spring when he'd claimed to have a promising interview with a consulting firm, an interview he'd canceled 2 hours beforehand because the company wasn't prestigious enough for someone of his caliber. His hair was styled with the $70 pomade from my bathroom, the one he'd insisted was necessary for maintaining professional appearance, and his posture had changed, straightened, and rehearsed, like he'd spent hours in front of a mirror practicing this exact moment. I picked up the Harrison Industries contract from where he'd carelessly pushed it to the corner, this single document representing more revenue than Blake had generated in his entire adult life, and watched his eyes follow the movement with something between envy and entitlement. "Your attorney?" I repeated, noticing the business card peeking out from under the mortgage papers. Garrett and Associates printed in aggressive bold letters, the same garish yellow I'd seen on bus bench advertisements downtown. "That was different," Blake said, shifting in my ergonomic chair that cost more than his monthly gym membership. "This is about protecting our interests, making sure we're both treated fairly in this partnership." I thought about the contractors I'd hired to repair the roof leak Blake never noticed, despite living under it for 3 years, the landscaping service I paid for while Blake claimed he was too busy networking to maintain the yard, the cleaning crew that came twice weekly because Blake's contribution to household maintenance meant leaving protein shake bottles on every surface. "You've contributed to this marriage," I said, picking up his legal pad and scanning his childish attempt at asset division, noting how he'd listed everything I owned, including items from before we'd ever met. My grandmother's jewelry collection, the lakefront cabin my father had left me. Blake stood up abruptly, moving around the desk to face me directly. "I've sacrificed for us, Cassidy," he said with rising intensity. "While you were building your empire, I maintained our home. I supported your career. I put my own dreams on hold so you could chase yours." His dreams, the consulting firm that never had clients, the app development company that never developed applications, the investment advisory service that couldn't advise anyone because Blake never obtained the required licenses. "The house is mine, Blake," I said quietly, turning to look out at the garden I'd designed and paid for. It was mine before you. The deed carries only my name. I've paid every single mortgage payment from my business account. Blake's face flushed red as he grabbed the bank statements. These show joint account transfers, he insisted. Those transfers covered groceries and utilities, I explained. Blake slammed the papers down, his composure shattering. I deserve something for these 4 years, he said, his voice breaking. You can't just pretend I contributed nothing. Emma appeared in my office doorway exactly 23 minutes after Blake left, her usually confident demeanor replaced with visible discomfort, carrying the monthly financial statements she'd never delivered with such obvious reluctance. I wasn't sure if I should bring these directly to you, she began, setting the folder on my desk with careful precision. Blake picked them up from accounting yesterday afternoon, said he. Wanted to help with the monthly review, claimed he was trying to understand the business better. I opened the folder slowly, scanning past the usual operating expenses and client payments, finding what Emma had clearly already discovered buried on page 3. Garrett and Associates, $2,500 retainer fee, dated exactly 3 weeks ago on the same evening Blake had surprised me with roses and reservations at my favorite restaurant. Emma shifted uncomfortably. He mentioned wanting to understand corporate asset division, asked specifically about how partnerships handle property acquired during business development. I assumed he meant business partnerships, not marriage. My phone rang at precisely 12:30, Blake's name appearing with our wedding photo, both of us laughing at something off camera. Hi, sweetheart. His voice carried that strange rehearsed quality, like actors in community theater productions. What time will you be home tonight? I'm planning something special for dinner. Blake didn't cook. In 4 years, he'd mastered reheating takeout and occasionally not burning toast. We need to talk about our future, he continued, and I could hear papers rustling. About making some changes that will benefit both of us. I'll be home by 7, I lied, already rearranging my schedule. Should I pick up wine? No, I've got everything handled, Blake said quickly. Just bring yourself. Bring an open mind. My mother called within minutes, her Florida number appearing with unfortunate timing. Cassidy, honey, I'm confused about something, she began. Blake called this morning asking detailed questions about your father's Vermont cabin. Wanted to know if the deed was in your name exclusively, claimed he was helping you organize family assets for tax purposes. The cabin represented 2 acres of lakefront property my father had left me 5 years ago. Blake had visited exactly once, complaining about lack of cell service before swearing he'd never return. What did you tell him, Mom? Nothing specific, but he was remarkably persistent, she replied. Asked about your grandmother's jewelry, too, whether it had been formally appraised, since when does Blake care about jewelry appraisals? Mom, if he calls again, tell him you don't remember details. Already done, she said with satisfaction. I told him my memory isn't what it used to be, though I remember perfectly well what I think of men who start asking about asset values while pretending to care about family. After hanging up, I made the call I'd been avoiding. Rachel Thornton answered on the first ring. Cassidy, I've been expecting your call, she said. Word travels in legal circles. Blake's been making himself visible at professional events, chatting up divorce attorneys at the Harrington Charity Gala last month. I remembered that night, Blake had disappeared for nearly an hour while I was securing donations, claimed he'd been networking with potential business contacts. Rachel's keyboard clicked, rapidly. The CBW Holdings Trust. You established 2 years before your marriage, house titled exclusively to that trust. Your business incorporated a separate entity, all premarital assets documented and carefully maintained as separate from any marital funds. Legally speaking, you're not just protected, you're absolutely bulletproof. Then why does this feel like I'm losing something? Because you are, Rachel said gently. You're losing the illusion of who you thought you married, and that's often more painful than losing money or property. Let him play his hand tonight, document everything. Men like Blake always overplay when they think they're winning. Their ego becomes evidence. Missouri is a one-party consent state. Your phone in your pocket is perfectly legal. Rachel's words echoed in my mind as I prepared for the evening ahead, knowing that whatever Blake had planned would reveal more about his character than any investigation could uncover. That sometimes the best strategy in dealing with people who underestimate you is simply letting them prove exactly how foolish they are. I arrived home at exactly 7 o'clock with my phone recording in my jacket pocket, the small device feeling heavier than its actual weight. The house smelled wrong immediately. Cheap Chinese food from that highway restaurant we'd tried once, and sworn never to patronize again after finding hair in the fried rice. He'd set the dining room table with my grandmother's Wedgwood china, the delicate blue and white plates she'd brought from England in 1952, surviving 2 world wars and 3 generations to end up as props in Blake's theatrical production. We'd used these plates twice in 4 years, once for our first anniversary when Blake complained about hand-washing being pretentious, and once when my biggest client signed a 5-year extension. Blake moved around the kitchen with unfamiliar purpose, plating orange chicken and beef broccoli, and he'd lit the expensive candles I saved for power outages, dimming the lights to create what he probably imagined was romantic ambiance, but actually felt more like a funeral parlor. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to my usual chair while positioning himself between me and the nearest exit, a manila folder tucked under his arm. He'd changed into his navy suit, another purchase made with my credit card during last year's job search that produced 0 job offers. "We need to have an honest conversation about our marriage," Blake began, launching into an obviously prepared monologue. "Cassidy, we've grown apart. Our life paths have diverged in ways neither of us anticipated when we exchanged vows." He paused dramatically, probably imitating some actor he'd seen in a movie. "I've been doing soul-searching, attending therapy, working on myself, trying to understand why our relationship feels so unbalanced. Therapy was news to me. Unless he counted watching YouTube motivation videos, Blake had never set foot in an actual therapist's office. "I've realized our marriage has become fundamentally unbalanced," he continued, his voice taking on the smooth cadence of a bad TED Talk. "You're completely consumed by your career, and I've been left to manage everything else alone. All the emotional labor, the household management, the sacrifice of my own dreams and ambitions to support yours." I reached for my water glass, letting him continue while studying his face, noting how his gestures were too coordinated, his pauses too calculated. Even the way his hands gripped the chair back looked staged. "I think it's best if we separate," he finally said, sliding the manila folder across the table. "I've had papers drawn up that I believe are fair to both parties, equitable division of what we've built together." I opened the folder slowly while Blake watched with barely concealed anticipation, his breathing slightly accelerated. The first page confirmed exactly what I'd expected, a joke of a legal document that looked downloaded from a template website filled with creative interpretations of property law. He was demanding the house, citing contributions to maintenance, conveniently ignoring that he'd never paid for a single repair. He wanted alimony based on career sacrifices. What career? What sacrifices? He'd even listed my business as a marital asset, claiming he'd been an unofficial consultant throughout its development. "You want half of Cassidy Blackwood Consulting?" I said. "I've been your sounding board for every major decision," Blake replied, his confidence growing. "I've attended networking events with you, supported your late nights, sacrificed my own entrepreneurial ventures so you could focus on building your company." I continued reading, my expression carefully neutral while internally cataloging every ridiculous claim, every legal impossibility. He wanted my grandmother's jewelry, calling it marital gifts despite knowing I'd inherited every piece before we'd met. The Vermont cabin was listed as joint recreational property despite his single miserable visit. Even my car, purchased 6 months before our wedding, was somehow classified as a shared asset. Blake moved closer, standing over me in an intimidation posture. "This is what's fair, Cassidy. What we built together should be divided equally. Are you going to sign?" I set down the papers and looked up at him. "You want the house?" "I deserve the house," Blake shot back. "I've made it a home while you treated it like a hotel." I picked up the pen he'd placed beside the papers, a cheap blue Bic, and Blake stepped back, anticipating victory. "No," I said simply, setting the pen down. Blake's face flushed deep red. "What do you mean, no? You have to sign these papers. This is what's happening. I've made my decision." "Your decision about my house, my business, my inheritance?" I said, standing slowly. Blake's hands clenched into fists. "Don't lecture me about law," he shouted, slamming his palm on the table hard enough to rattle my grandmother's china. "My attorney says, your attorney who advertises on bus benches," I interrupted. Blake's face went from red to purple. He leaned across the table, his voice dropping to what he thought was menacing. "You're going to sign these papers, Cassidy. You can do it voluntarily, or we can do this the hard way." "What does the hard way mean exactly?" He straightened to his full height, pointing at the door. "Sign the papers or get out," he declared. "This is my house now. I've established residency. Sign or pack your things and leave tonight." I picked up the pen again, watching Blake's body relax in premature victory, and I signed every page slowly, deliberately, my name flowing with the same precision I used for million-dollar contracts. When I finished, I removed my house keys from my pocket, placing them next to the signed papers, adding my wedding ring, the platinum band I'd purchased myself. I stood, collected my purse, and walked toward the door without speaking. Blake called after me, confused triumph in his voice. "That's it? You're just leaving?" I paused at the doorway, looking back at him standing among takeout containers and stolen china, holding papers he didn't understand, and I said nothing. Absolutely nothing. 20 minutes later, I sat in Rachel's conference room, everything already prepared with military precision. Coffee in real ceramic cups, legal documents spread across the table in organized sections, each properly tabbed and labeled. "He said it," Rachel asked, pulling up social media. "Word for word, sign or get out," I confirmed. He even pointed at the door for emphasis. Rachel's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Perfect. Now let's review what he's been posting." Blake's Instagram glowed on the screen, a post uploaded 45 minutes after I'd left, showing him raising a beer in my living room surrounded by his gym crew, the caption reading, "New chapter starts now. Sometimes you have to remove toxic people to find your peace. Hashtag fresh start. Hashtag my house, my rules." "He's literally broadcasting evidence," Rachel said, taking screenshots. "Look at this one." She scrolled to another post showing my home office transformed into a gaming paradise. 3 monitors on my handcrafted desk, LED strips on walls I'd painted myself, the caption reading, "Finally turning this workspace into something productive." My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Martinez, my neighbor. "Blake's having quite the party. Just watched him give a tour to about 10 people. He's telling everyone you abandoned the marriage for your career." Another text followed with video Jennifer had filmed from her window, catching Blake on my porch with his brother and gym buddies. "She chose spreadsheets over family," Blake announced. "I gave her an ultimatum and she literally walked out. Can you believe that? 4 years of me supporting her ambition." Marcus Chin called with news that all company accounts had been restructured. Blake's access terminated at 8:47, his corporate card deactivated. 17 automatic payments suspended, including his BMW lease, gym membership, country club access, and executive presence coaching that had been charging $400 monthly for a year. Blake attempted to use the corporate card at Velocity Sports Bar, Marcus added. Transaction declined. My sister Sarah called minutes later, her voice tight with anger. "Blake just called claiming you're having a breakdown, suggested I encourage you to seek therapy for workaholism. He's trying to control the narrative," I explained. Morning arrived with Emma's text at 5:47. "Can we meet before office opens? There's something I should have told you months ago." We met at a quiet coffee shop where she showed me Instagram photos of Blake with Jessica Reeves, a personal trainer wearing my grandmother's pearls, my Cartier watch, my diamond tennis bracelet. All the jewelry Blake had claimed was lost or being cleaned. Rachel's forensic accountant found Blake's secret account, $37,000 in structured cash deposits over 4 months, corresponding with items disappearing from my storage unit, my father's signed first editions, my grandmother's silver tea service, systematically liquidating my assets while I paid for everything. Mrs. Chin next door showed me doorbell camera footage. Blake and Jessica entering my house while I was at business meetings, carrying boxes of my belongings to his car, stealing from me piece by piece. At 8:47 the next morning, Blake's BMW was repossessed from my driveway. His phone service terminated. Smart home system locked him out. Every card declined. Thomas Garrett called Rachel in full panic, realizing Blake had signed documents acknowledging the trust structure while attempting to steal property. "You need to vacate immediately," Garrett told Blake on speakerphone, "before she files criminal charges." Rachel gave him 72 hours, and I watched through security cameras as Blake's brother helped him pack his meager possessions, everything fitting in a U-Haul smaller than my walk-in closet. The truck disappearing at 5:47, carrying his borrowed luxuries and shattered delusions. The locksmith came at 6, replacing every lock, reprogramming every code. ServiceMaster deep-cleaned every room, erasing Blake's presence, reclaiming space he'd contaminated with betrayal. 6 months later, I hosted my first dinner party, Rachel with her wife, Emma with her husband, Mrs. Chin with her famous dumplings Blake had called too ethnic, gathered around my dining room table, using my grandmother's china for its actual purpose. Rachel raised her glass as we finished dessert. "To Cassidy," she said, "who proved the best revenge isn't destroying someone who wronged you. It's protecting what was always yours and letting them destroy themselves." The toast echoed through my house, where every room now held my choices, my memories, my future, and Blake had learned what happens when performance meets preparation, when pretense collides with patience, when someone thinking they're taking everything discovers they never had anything to take.